Welcome to our podcast. I suddenly feel sad without reason. There are moments when everything seems fine on the surface. The day goes on as usual. Conversations flow. Tasks get checked off the list. Yet without warning, this strange heaviness creeps in. No clear reason, no specific trigger. Just this sudden wave of sadness that settles into your chest. You try to brush it off, distract yourself, maybe scroll through your phone or put on some music. But the feeling lingers, stubborn and quiet. It's odd, isn't it? How emotions sometimes arrive uninvited, like a guest you didn't expect and don't quite know how to entertain. You search for explanations, asking yourself if you missed something, if there was a subtle sign you overlooked, but nothing makes sense. Everything seems normal, yet something within you doesn't feel right. In moments like these, I wonder if it's just part of being human. Maybe our minds carry more than we realize. Memories, worries, fragments of thoughts we didn't even notice taking root. And when the weight of it all becomes too much, even without a clear cause, it shows up as this sudden sadness. It's easy to feel frustrated with yourself for not being able to shake it off. You might tell yourself there's no reason to feel this way, that others have it worse, that you should just snap out of it. But emotions aren't always logical. They don't follow rules or fit neatly into categories. Sometimes they just exist, raw and unexplained. What if instead of fighting these feelings, we simply sat with them? Not to wallow, but to acknowledge that they're part of us. To treat them with a bit of compassion rather than impatience. It's strange how much lighter things can feel when you stop resisting them. Maybe sadness is a signal, a quiet reminder that something within needs attention. Not in a grand, life-changing way, but perhaps just a gentle nudge to slow down, to breathe, to reconnect with yourself. Life moves fast, and in the rush to keep up, we sometimes forget to check in with how we're really doing. And maybe that's why these moments of unexpected sadness come. Because somewhere along the way, we lost touch with ourselves. It's as if our hearts are asking us to pause and listen, even when we don't fully understand what they're saying. When I think about it that way, sadness doesn't seem as threatening. It becomes less of an enemy and more of a teacher, albeit a difficult one. It teaches patience, self-awareness, and perhaps most importantly, empathy. Because once you've sat with your own sadness, you become gentler with others when they face theirs. It's not always easy to sit with uncomfortable emotions. We live in a world that encourages us to be happy, productive, and positive all the time. But that's not realistic, is it? Life is messy and unpredictable, and so are our feelings. So maybe the next time sadness shows up without warning, instead of asking why it's here, we can ask what it needs from us. Maybe it's a reminder to slow down, to let go of something we've been holding too tightly, or simply to rest. And maybe, just maybe, we'll come out on the other side with a deeper understanding of ourselves. Because even in sadness, there's growth. Even in stillness, there's healing. And sometimes, the most meaningful parts of life are found not in the answers, but in the quiet moments when we simply allow ourselves to feel. It's strange how a feeling can show up out of nowhere, without context or warning, and take hold of your entire mood. One moment you're fine, moving through the day without much thought, and then suddenly, it's as if the air around you has changed. Heavier somehow, quieter. You sit there trying to figure it out, tracing your steps backward, searching for something, anything, that might explain it. But nothing stands out. No sharp memory, no hurtful word, no recent disappointment. Just this quiet ache that settles in, as if it's always been there, waiting for the right moment to show itself. Maybe that's part of what makes it unsettling. We're so used to assigning reasons to everything. We want to label feelings, break them down, and categorize them neatly. Sad because of this, happy because of that. But some feelings don't come with a reason. They simply exist, and we're left to carry them without fully understanding why. And isn't that uncomfortable? To not have control? To not be able to fix something right away? We like solutions. We like moving forward. But what if the answer isn't to fix it, but to simply let it be? Sometimes I think about how nature handles change. Trees lose their leaves without complaint. The sky darkens without asking for permission. The ocean doesn't fight its waves. It just moves with them, endlessly. Maybe that's what we're meant to do with our emotions. Move with them, rather than against them. It sounds simple, but it's not. Because sadness makes us feel vulnerable. And vulnerability is hard. We want to protect ourselves from it, wrap ourselves in distractions until the feeling fades. And sure, sometimes that works. But other times, the sadness lingers, waiting for acknowledgement. And when we finally stop running from it, something surprising happens. We realize it's not as unbearable as we thought. It softens, like a knot slowly loosening. And in that softness, there's clarity. Maybe not answers, but at least the understanding that this feeling won't last forever. We forget that emotions are temporary. When we're happy, we don't think about when it'll end. We just enjoy it. But when we're sad, we convince ourselves it's permanent, as though we'll never feel light again. That's the trick sadness plays. It makes you forget that joy is still possible. But joy does return, sometimes in the smallest ways. A warm breeze on your face, the sound of laughter from someone you love, even the comfort of your own breath, steady and reliable, reminding you that you're still here. It's strange how sometimes you catch yourself feeling heavy, as if you've been carrying something invisible for days without even noticing. There's no specific moment that stands out. Nothing obvious to point to. It's just there, a quiet sadness resting in the corners of your mind. You might try to shake it off. Maybe distract yourself by talking to someone or watching something entertaining. And sometimes that works, but other times it doesn't. The feeling lingers, stubborn and persistent, like it's waiting for you to acknowledge it. I wonder if part of the problem is that we're not taught how to handle feelings without clear explanations. From a young age, we're conditioned to justify our emotions. If you cry, someone asks what's wrong. If you're upset, they want to know why. But what if there isn't a why? What if it's just how you feel in that moment? It's hard to accept that, isn't it? Because we want clarity, we want logic. But emotions don't always work that way. They rise and fall like waves, sometimes peaceful, sometimes turbulent, but rarely predictable. And yet there's a strange kind of beauty in that unpredictability. Maybe sadness reminds us that we're alive, that we're capable of feeling deeply even when the world expects us to keep it together. There's a certain bravery in sitting with emotions you don't fully understand. It takes strength to let yourself feel without judgment. And that's not something we talk about often. How courage isn't just about bold actions, but sometimes about simply being present with yourself, even when it's uncomfortable. When you think about it, no one's life is without moments like these. Even the happiest people have days when sadness visits unexpectedly. It's part of being human, this spectrum of emotions we navigate. Maybe that's why connecting with others can feel so healing, even if they don't have the right words. Knowing someone else has been there too makes the weight a little easier to bear. Because in the end, we're not meant to carry everything alone. But even when no one's around, there's something to be said for finding comfort in yourself. Learning to sit quietly with your own heart, without rushing to change how you feel, can be one of the most transformative things you ever do. It's interesting how our minds work, isn't it? One day, everything feels balanced, manageable, maybe even joyful. And then out of nowhere, this strange emptiness appears. No grand event, no sudden tragedy. Just a quiet sadness that wraps itself around you. It's almost like walking into a fog. The world around you hasn't changed, but your perception of it has. Colors seem duller, sounds quieter, and the usual things that bring comfort feel distant. You wonder why it's there, what triggered it, but sometimes there's no answer. We often think of emotions as logical outcomes, cause and effect, but they don't always follow that formula. They can be whispers from parts of ourselves we've neglected, or echoes of something buried so deep we don't even recognize it anymore. And maybe that's why these feelings show up unannounced. They're like invitations to pause, to check in with parts of ourselves we've been too busy to notice. But that's hard to do, isn't it? We live in a world that glorifies busyness, where stillness is often mistaken for weakness. Yet sometimes stillness is exactly what we need, not to solve anything, but simply to be present with whatever shows up, even if that's sadness. It's uncomfortable, sure, but there's a kind of wisdom that comes from allowing yourself to feel without rushing to fix it. It makes me think about how we treat physical pain. If your body hurts, you pay attention. You rest, you heal. But with emotional pain, we tend to do the opposite. We push through it, ignore it, hope it goes away on its own. And maybe that's why it sometimes sticks around longer than it needs to. What if instead we treated sadness with the same care we'd give a physical wound? Not by wallowing in it, but by acknowledging it, respecting it, and giving ourselves permission to heal at our own pace. Because healing isn't linear. It doesn't follow a schedule or fit neatly into timelines. Sometimes it looks like laughter returning unexpectedly, and other times it's just getting through the day without feeling overwhelmed. Both are valid, both are progress. And along the way, there's value in remembering that you're not alone. Even when it feels like no one else could possibly understand what you're feeling, someone out there does. The human experience is shared in ways we often overlook. There's a strange kind of mystery in the human heart, isn't there? One moment, you're moving through life as usual, and the next, this unexpected sadness drifts in, quiet but undeniable. It doesn't knock or announce itself. It just arrives, as if it belongs. What makes it so unsettling is how it defies explanation. We're taught to seek reasons for everything, to connect dots, to solve puzzles. And when emotions show up without a clear cause, we get uncomfortable. We scramble to make sense of it, as though understanding it will make it go away. But maybe not everything needs to be understood right away. Maybe some emotions are meant to be felt before they're analyzed. It's funny how often people associate sadness with weakness. But when you really think about it, sadness can be a sign of depth. Proof that you're fully alive, fully aware of the complexities of being human. People who feel deeply are often the ones who notice the beauty in small, quiet moments too. Maybe that's the other side of the same coin. There's this idea that happiness is the goal, the standard we should always aim for. But what if emotions are like seasons, each with its own purpose? You wouldn't rush spring or wish away autumn just because summer feels brighter. Sadness, like any season, has its lessons, though we often don't appreciate them until much later. One of those lessons might be learning to listen to your inner voice. When everything's loud and exciting, it's easy to drown out your own thoughts. But sadness brings stillness. And in that stillness, you hear things you might have ignored. Maybe it's a longing you've buried or a dream you've put off for too long. Or maybe it's simply your heart asking you to slow down and just be. The world doesn't always encourage that kind of stillness. We're taught to stay busy, to keep pushing forward, to distract ourselves from anything uncomfortable. But there's a quiet kind of wisdom in doing the opposite, sitting with yourself even when it's hard. You might be surprised at what you find when you do. Maybe you'll remember a part of yourself you've forgotten. Or maybe you'll just feel a little lighter, knowing you've given your emotions the respect they deserve. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and give it a thumbs up. Also, feel free to share your thoughts or any questions you have in the comments below.